Hello and welcome in to another episode of Betting the Pitch. It is the off season. This is episode 100. Drum roll, please. And six. We're going to go through Ligue 1, French top division, which is going through a bunch of changes this season. And honestly, one of my favorite leagues to watch, though it's not exactly covered the most in the media, has been called a Farmers League. But we're going to go through each team, including the newly promoted, talking about what to expect from them based on last season's results, plus some transfer talk based on what has been done with the roster so far. And then lastly, we'll go through some futures towards the end. Going to do PSG, and we're going to start from the teams that just got recently promoted to make everybody hang with them or hang with me for as long as possible. We'll get to PSG and talk about probably their Champions League ideas or expectations for this season as we get towards the end. But we got odds to win out there. We have top assists. We have some player awards, odds to win without PSG, which is cool. And we got some relegation, which is big. Top three finish. I mean, we could go for days, top five finish even. So that's exciting. Don't have a lot of those, but I guess we're getting closer and closer to the season starting. Starts about on, I guess, August 4th is when these odds are going to go down. So thanks for coming in. And without further ado, we'll get through and start with the recent promoteds. We got, I think we only had two because promotion playoff, we have three because Saint-Etienne lost the promotion playoff to Angers, which is great. I'm very happy to see them relegated because they were an awful team and treated me really poorly this season. So I'm looking forward to that. I guess we'll start with last season's champions, which was Toulouse, who nearly made it up in the playoff the year before from Ligue 2. And it's a little bit different this year as 4 teams will be relegated and only 2 will come up as they're transitioning back to 18 teams out of the 20 that were in Ligue 1 for this season. So when I look at, I mean, I don't have a ton of insight into Toulouse. They went down a couple seasons ago, nearly got back last year, and then won the second division this year, which is a great situation to be in. I feel like that's the best chance of any club that's coming up from a lower league is the champion of last season is usually in the best place. But it's still going to be an uphill battle. The nice part is that the French league is dealing with major money problems. Despite it sounds like some American investors coming in with an infusion, I think within the last day or so. But we'll end up seeing what happens with that one. Currently looking, I can't say I know a lot about the arrivals coming in, nor the departures leaving from Toulouse, really. And we'll, I guess, see what happens. They have the same manager, Philippe Montpellier, who's been there since the end of 2021. So that's good. They are maintaining and keeping their coach. But looking at their roster, there's not a lot on here that I'm familiar with. But it is something to say that they were pretty close to getting promoted last season, did win the league this season. And that's, I think, as good of a position as you can be in. Next, we'll go Ajaccio. Good. I'm going to have to learn how to pronounce this before this all starts. Looking at their transfer business, it looks like they brought in Roman Hamuma from Saint-Etienne, which is a name that I definitely know. There's a lot of creativity on that Saint-Etienne team. It's sad that they went down, especially because they're a big club. But it was something that I think was deserved, so I'm not going to complain about it. They brought in Mangani from Angers, which they've been having money troubles themselves and trying to get that figured out. So we'll see what that ends up looking like. In terms of players they lost, only one, it looks like, stayed in the French league, and that's Gédéon Kalulu, who went to FC Lorient, who we'll get to in a little bit. The rest, so it looks like they're spending some money into the team. They got a longtime coach at Ajaccio, Olivier Pantaloni. I guess olive pants, if you're gonna translate it to English. And he's been around. I guess his contract just expired, but he's been around for 8 years, so we'll see if he sticks. And then looks like Jordan Gaultier, might be Christophe Gaultier's son or something like that, is on the staff as well. We'll see how that all goes. But I'm not going to debate managers that I don't know a lot about, because that is not worth even discussing. But they're going to have a tough time. I believe they are on the island that is shared with Cagliari in Italian football, an island that's split in the middle of Corsica, maybe. Anyway, for the geography buffs, you probably know a lot more about that than I do. And then we'll move to AJ Auxerre, who were able to knock off Saint Etienne in the playoff, which is awesome. And I think it was deserved based on how they were playing and how conservative Saint Etienne were, really looking like they were kind of expecting to get demoted or relegated, I guess is the better way to say it. In terms of bringing in players, they've taken a bunch of guys from other positions within Ligue 1, but none that were names that I really remember. And I don't really feel like they've lost anyone that was known. But it looks like Gatin Charbonnier is on the Ajaccio team. So that's a name that I've seen before, or excuse me, the Auxerre team. Easy for me to pronounce. Probably should have practiced before we got out here. I mean, there's some names that I've seen before. I'm not sure exactly what that looks like, but now we'll dive into the other teams, though, to put squad values, which is how we're doing this. That's how it's ranked on Transfer Market, and seeing Clermont Foot, who had a pretty good season last year, remaining in the league after being promoted, seeing them as the third lowest squad value. So Toulouse is above them. That's a good sign for Toulouse and potentially staying in the league, because money matters in this sport, but it doesn't always matter and doesn't mean everything. And looking at the Clermont Foot team, they brought in Gonalons from Granada on a free transfer. That's a good move. I feel like he's a good player. It still has plenty of talent in him. Conan Aldridge, who came from Dinamo Zagreb. I don't really know that name very well, but they did sell Mohamed Bayo to Lille, who's their big time scorer. Started off the year really hot last year, and there were rumors that he was going to go in the January transfer window, but they ended up keeping him at least, and it probably did a good job for them to stay in the league. Other departures, none that really seem too big of names or too important, but we'll see what ends up happening, because there's still plenty of time in this transfer window. We'll see what happens. Gonalons at 33 years old might not be that big of an impact, but moving down from Granada, down from La Liga to Ligue 1, we'll still have a La Liga podcast. That's the last top European league that I still need to go through, but felt like there's so much changing at Barcelona that I have to wait a little bit to see what happens and what settles there. Next, just a little bit above Toulouse, well, $15 million or so. So that's a pretty significant financial advantage, is Estac Troyes. Troyes were really good last season at scoring goals. It felt like they had one match where they got 3 penalties, but that's probably not something we would expect too often. In terms of departures, none of the big names that I would have known. Bringing in Julien Biancone is a name that I've seen from Nottingham Forest, which is kind of surprising, because he was could have been promoted into the Premier League, and I figured he would have stayed. So that sounds like there was an attempt to go grab him. That means something. From what I remember, or what I looked at with Estac Troyes, is that they were pretty competitive against the bigger clubs, and that's a big sign in France, because there's not a huge difference besides PSG and to the rest of the league. Maybe the Champions League sides like Monaco and others that are pretty strong as well. But Eric Palmer Brown, an American international, important to see him still with the club. There's plenty of rumors that he'd be moving on, and I don't think that ship has sailed just yet. But he's important as the center back, and what was, I believe, a 3-man back line. And it was a pretty good team that were pretty competitive, I got to say, for recently promoted, and that's why they're still in the league this year. Moved next to Angers, who had a really great season despite a lot of my concern about being relegated. They sold their keeper middle of the season, Paul Bernardoni, to Saint Etienne, I think because they needed money, and Saint Etienne were trying to rescue their position in the league. Didn't work out for them, but now he's back. I think it was a loan transfer, but they took, I guess, made whatever money they could back from him. And from what I can see, Angers, in terms of what they've done in the offseason, they brought in some players that seem to be all pretty cheap, including taking Adrien Huneau from the MLS. Never a good sign going into the MLS for talent. But I mean, there have been some decent players that have done fairly well in league coming. One of the Lens players specifically, Frankowski, I believe. But then looking at the rest of the movement that's happened, Bahoken moved. Looks like Pereira's gone to Stade Brest. Jimmy Cabot to Lens. Fulgini, who's a good signing by Mainz, to the Bundesliga. And Mohamed Ali Cho, who's a big name, had moved on to Real Sociedad for only 12 million, which seems pretty low. But there's a lot of movement from this team. They've been struggling financially. It looks like they got Thioub back off of loan from Saint Etienne, which is another money grab thing, I imagine, but they stayed in the league, so good for them. We'll see what happens with Sofianbufall, who is pretty good for Monaco in their qualifying attempts and getting into the World Cup. I think this is a pretty good team that has had financial difficulties, but somehow survived last season. I tipped them as a potential team to fight relegation. They didn't do that. Some of the bigger clubs in French football history were the ones that went down, so that was a big surprise. But I'm not sure that the smoke has cleared just yet. So I would still look to them as potentially a relegation candidate as we move forward. Stade Brestois were really good last season in a defensive kind of capacity. Marco Bizot, their goalkeeper, was great. We'll see if he can keep that up. But in terms of the club and what they've done in the transfer window, they brought in Pereira from Angers, which is always great to grab people from other teams within your league. L'Arsenal went down to Valenciennes in the, I believe, second or maybe third tier in France. Lost Lasne to Paris FC in the second division, I believe. So the losses don't seem to be too bad. I wonder if Steve Mounier is going to move on, about 27 years old. Maybe he's sticking around. Cardona is important. Del Castillo is also important, as well as Frank Honrat. So it seems like a lot of the Stade Brest team have stuck around, and that's important to see what happens for them for next year, because they're going to be fine margins to stay in the league, as a lot of these teams in France will be. Move above them to FC Lorient, who I'm a little bit surprised to see their value as high as it is above some of these other clubs that are a lot more traditional, or at least have been in the league a while. They brought in a backup goalkeeper from RB Leipzig to come in and maybe challenge for the job, in addition to Kalulu, who I've already mentioned, coming in from Ajaccio, I believe. In terms of losses, Fabien Lemoy, who's older, Jeremy Moel, and Jerome Hugo, all older players. So seem like they're investing in trying to get younger, which is pretty important. Gerbic coming in matters, I think. And they've done some more movement that isn't necessarily reflected in the transfer market part of the acquisitions, which maybe there's a whenever the year turns over type of thing. But Monconduit is also a decent player. And I think Lorient, they basically were just a really, really bad defense last year that somehow maintained their position in the league. They scored goals. Terran Monfi is a big deal, who still seems to be, even at 23 years old, worth almost $10 million. Nigerian is still at the club. We'll see if that sticks. But they were a sit back, defend, and counterattack. Had a really famous win over PSG 2 years ago, but really didn't have a good year. It's kind of amazing that they stayed. The aptly named Armand Loriente, who was so good on free kicks, he's still there. So it seems like a lot of the players that were important to Lorient last season are still around. We'll see if Nardi can keep his job. Though I would think if they just brought in a keeper at about the same market value, that it might be a chance that he'll probably stay. We'll see. And maybe Nardi will move on. Dreyer also is another keeper who's older and certainly getting older and is worth very little, but played a lot for him. So we'll see what ends up happening with the goalkeeper position. But Lorient, I mean, when you're a small team, let's see, looks like 7 teams below them in terms of squad value. So that's not so bad. I mean, all you got to do is finish, I guess, fifth to last, and then you're still up. But Lorient have done more than a lot of teams because money is really tight in this league. Move up to Nantes, the French Coupe de la Ligue champions. Pretty incredible considering they nearly got relegated, had to survive a relegation playoff last season, or 2 seasons ago, and then last season beat Nice in the winner take all Coupe de la Ligue, or French Coupe. Coupe de France, excuse me. And that was a big win. Alban Lafont, really good goalkeeper, 23 years old, worth almost 18 million. Surprised he's still around. He was a really important player, which is tough to say when your goalkeeper is so good. But in terms of departures, Moussa Sissoko left for Watford, but that was a while ago, so that doesn't seem to affect what this is. He's an arrival, someone they brought in from Watford. So that's a good central defensive midfielder. Sissoko getting older and certainly didn't have a great time at Watford last season, but bringing in any sort of defender or defensive midfielder is important. I think losing Colomwani to Eintracht Frankfurt on a free transfer, incredible bit of business done by Frankfurt, but they're really good at that. Also seeing Jean-Kevin Augustin gone to FC Basel. Maybe not that big of a difference if he's only going to the Swiss league. But certainly that there was a lot of attacking talent at Nantes, and it was a big deal and why they got to where they did. They brought in Evan Gasson from Nice on a loan. They have a lot of attacking players. That's not so surprising, but Moses Simon is still there at $11 million in value. Coco done a little bit better than I think you'd expect based on his age. I guess he's only 26, or maybe based on his value. Ludovic Blas still there. We'll see if he sticks. He's someone I would expect to move. Kiravella is in there in the back line. Apia on the wing. Fabio as well. I mean, it seems like this team is still there. There's a lot of praise for Camboire for his job as manager last season. I think he kind of saved them in the relegation playoff 2 seasons ago. So I think the future is bright. Got their reset that they needed. We'll see what happens with them. It's certainly going to be a big year for them to try to stay in the league, though they are a pretty famous club and shouldn't be in that type of situation. Montpellier then come up next, who basically were dead the last half of the season, didn't do anything, lost some historic matches with big leads, gave up a ton of goals, had some decent performances in them as when basically the whole marketplace had given up on them. And were like 1 point dog or full goal dogs to pretty bad teams. But there's some problems, I think, financially. They sold off their 2 best strikers in the end of the transfer window, basically trying to squeeze as many minutes as possible for them while they're still on the team. And it did keep them in the league, and they were safe for a long time. But the disappointing end to the season does cause some concerns. In terms of departures, you see Florent Mollet, who's a really good player in the midfield, attacking midfield. He left for Schalke at a small $500,000 fee. Sambia gone from right back. Ristich gone from left back. Oyongo not on the team anymore. Cabello, I don't recognize that name, but bringing in Nordon from Saint Etienne was big. Khazri from Saint Etienne as well, because they went through their fire sale. So maybe that's kind of what they needed. Sacco coming in at right back to replace Sambia is, I guess, important, but bringing in some older players from Saint Etienne who just got relegated. I guess Nordal's pretty young, so maybe that was a good move for them. But Khazri at 31, certainly trying to get ready for the World Cup. I think I have some big questions on what Montpellier are going to be. I know they had a big falling out with their manager who left before last season. But there was a team that has always had really good attacking talent, survived the losses of their attackers that they sold, but had a really bad year, and especially a bad close to the year. We'll see what happens, as they have a bit of a goalkeeper controversy between Omlin, who's a good keeper, but probably someone they want to sell, and Berthaud, who's 24 and younger. I'm curious to see kind of how Montpellier starts the season, because they ended it as poorly as you could. Next, we'll go to Strasbourg, who had a really good run that didn't end as well as they had hoped. But in terms of looking at who they brought in Colin Dagba on loan from PSG. Anytime you get a PSG player, especially with what they're paying for them now, is a big deal. Bringing in Thomas Delan from Metz, who were relegated, is a big free transfer. I really liked him on the wing 2 seasons ago. Metz were so good to me financially. Perrine coming in as center back from Marseille, who didn't get a lot of minutes, is important, but then you look at who they lost, and honestly that list isn't so bad. Kashi from left back going to Mainz. Mainz seems to be rating a lower league, going to the French league to get some good players, and we'll see. It makes me interested in seeing what Mainz will do for the season, but this is the Ligue 1 podcast, so we're staying here. Kevin Gamero still there, brought him in from Valencia, and he was good. Their 3-headed monster of Ajorc, Diallo, who they took from Metz as well, and Gamero. It's a pretty good trio up front. They're usually playing 2 at a time and bringing one off the bench, which means they always have someone fresh to attack you late. I think that was a big deal in how they kind of got to where they were from a very defensive side 2 seasons ago to being a little bit more offensive last year. And I think they want to sit somewhere in the middle. But it looks to me that they have some pretty good players still around. And we'll see what happens with this club, but I like them. We'll see, because I think they're in Europe. We'll see how they end up balancing, fighting on a couple of fronts. Move next to Reims, who were so good to me last year, probably my favorite team to back, and were just an ATM cash machine, essentially. There's some questions about kind of what they look like coming into this year, but they did buy Andrew Gravillon from Inter, who was on loan with them last year, which is great. Maxime Boussi from Parma also is coming in terms of who they lost. Ghislain Conan, he went to I guess he took the money at Al Nasser in, I guess, Qatar, or one of the Saudi Arabian area countries, something like that. Lost Doumbia as well to show. So that's a little bit surprising to see kind of who they lost. But in terms of squad values, they're still way up there, which is a little bit surprising to me because they never were that way. Loved Oscar Garcia. His style at Celta de Vigo was great, I thought, a couple seasons ago. And then he really only picked up where he left off and had a really good season with Rems. Really happy to see him still there. And they're a team I'm going to be looking to back, especially if they're an underdog in almost every match like they seem to be last season. In terms of what they have up front, I think Bilal Toure is important at 20 years old. But another name I'm looking, they brought in, I think, Donis, the Greek. Ekitike is still there. And that's, I think, the $31 million man. We'll see how long they keep him. He might be a sell end of window type of guy, or maybe even in January. But the team that I really liked and still want to back. Moving next to Lens, who are going to be on the front foot, assuming their manager is still in place, which I think he is. Yes, Frank Heiss. Yes, he's still there. Awesome team. Love what they do. Love Fofana so much. MVP of the Ligue, I believe, but hard to say when PSG won so clearly. In terms of who they brought in, Cabot from Angers is important. Samba back, or I think he was a starting keeper for Nottingham Forest, but he lost his job when they brought in Dean Henderson, I believe, from Manchester United. Lost Cheikh Doucouré to Crystal Palace from the defensive midfield. That to me is the most important pitch out there. Also, Kahuzak, he retired, but this is a good team that plays in the front foot. They have important players that are still there. I'm looking forward to seeing what they do this year. And I guess there's some rumors that Jonathan Klaus might move to Chelsea. He's 29, so that's not a big surprise. He probably wants his big paycheck towards the end of his career. But this is a good team, and I like what they have. Jean-Louis Leca is getting older, 36 years old, and might have lost the job to Fariñas, a Venezuelan. Not exactly sure what's going to happen to this team, but I'm looking forward to watching them. And they are a team that you want to back as an underdog because they will go at everybody. Certainly there's some risk in that, but they're not going to sit back and wait for you to score 3 goals. They're going to try to take the initiative. And if you can get underdogs to score, that seems to be the way to do it in this betting that we call football or international football. Lille are next, and they've been selling everything they could for years now. They brought in Mohamed Baya, which is a pretty big signing for them, considering everything has been going out and telling that it's a fire sale, basically, I think, due to financial situations. Zeki Celik going to Roma, that removes a right back, though he was in and out of the lineup towards the end of the year. Looks like Sheka is coming. He's without club now. I think that's basically just cutting his salary. Atem Ben Arfa is older, so not a big deal. But Bradarich moving to looks like Salernitana. I guess that's not that big of a name to me, but Sven Botman was huge at $41 million moving to Newcastle. They tried as long as they could to keep that from happening. It was supposed to happen the January window last season, but bringing in Mohamed Baya is a big deal. Timothy Weah, the United States international, still there, is important. Jonathan David from Canada, also important. I think trying to see kind of what this team's going to look like because they've had to go through so much. But yeah, Zichi, who they had loaned to CSKA Moscow, came back. Renato Sanchez is moving to PSG. And we'll see what happens. Onana might move to West Ham. I mean, there's a lot of rumors out there. They've been selling like crazy. So you really got to see what they have in their lineup. Jose Font as their captain at 38 years old. We'll see how much they can get out of him this season. And then their goalkeepers was really not a good situation after Maignan left for AC Milan. So we'll see what happens to this team. But I'm expecting them to still start heading in the wrong direction, down the table as opposed to up. Next, we'll move to OGC Nice, who just lost Christophe Galtier, which is unfortunate because he was a great manager, great defender. Didn't really have a great season, though. I think that was based on Nice being pretty young. Moving next, I guess their manager now is Lucien Favre, who you know from his firing at Dortmund after having a really bad season, though. As you could see last year, you could see the defense were big problems for them. Walter Benitez officially left the club, which is kind of a sad thing because he's a great keeper and had some really good times. They loaned out Ngasson to Nimes, a couple leagues below, and then also Guesson to Nantes, as we already mentioned. Brought in a goalkeeper from PSG, I guess, to replace Benitez. But there's a lot of money coming in on this team. And I'm not sure what to say about how that ended up working out in the project last year. And then Gaultier leaving for PSG was definitely not expected. Their defense has some good players. Dante as a center back at 38 is a concern, but Todibo and Danluc are good, both 22 and younger at center back. Bard is on the left, who came over from Lyon a couple seasons ago. He's important. I'd like to see kind of how their team kind of gels and moves forward now that Gaultier is gone, because they were more of an offensive side and he was more of a defensive manager. So it might be a better situation for them. We'll see what ends up happening. I don't necessarily believe that Favre will be out coached in this level of a league, but certainly didn't look great in the Bundesliga. Next, we'll go to Stade Rennais, or Rennes is the English version to it, I guess. Really good team that were expected to sell off a lot of players because they grossly overachieved. And it's disappointing that they didn't make it all the way into a Champions League place, because I think they got bounced toward the end on a pretty tough run at the end of the season. Steve Mandanda came in from Marseille. That's a good signing at goalkeeper for experience, if not anything else. Losing Aguerd to West Ham was a lot of money, but which they probably need, but disappointing. But a lot of their good attackers still seem to be there. And one thing that Rennes could do was they could score a ton of goals, and that's a big deal. And certainly I felt the wrath and the pain of them scoring a ton of goals on me last season, taking underdogs against them. But they were at a really good season. I'm curious to see if they can keep that up. Still have Baptiste Santa Maria, the former Freiburg player, to really keep everybody quiet, playing a good defensive midfield. But they were really good at scoring on with pace and getting other players you wouldn't expect in the box. I imagine that strategy will still be in place, as Favre seemed to be a more attacking manager than defensive one. Moving next to Marseille, who are fourth in quad value, pretty far behind Lyon, actually, but Lyon's always a young club, so thinking about probably the futures involved in those values. Marseille did lose Steve Mandanda, but he had lost the job. Rodonjic, who went to Torino, Lucas Perrin, who moved to Strasbourg, and Boubacar Kamara moved to Aston Villa, and that's disappointing because he was a free transfer. Igor Tudor came in as manager, it looks like, so Sampaoli is gone. It's a bit of a surprise to me. Igor Tudor, I'm trying to remember where he was last season. Verona, I think. Yeah, it looks like it. So that's interesting. And that he played a pretty offensive style, taking over for Juric, so maybe didn't want to change too much. But seeing Guendouzi coming in, as he was bought from Arsenal, seemed like that was never going to fit. Cengiz Ünder, who had a pretty good season, Arkadiusz Milik, and then also Pau Lopez. So those are guys that have stuck around, so that's important. A pretty good club. They've got a huge crowd behind them, definitely an intimidating venue as well. And I think they were kind of overvalued for a lot of the second half of the season, but are a good team and will be in Champions League. And I look forward to watching them there. Wish I could be going to Marseille to catch a game. That seems like something to do if you're into the football and you like going to Europe. I don't speak any French myself, though, unfortunately. Lyon are next as we're getting towards the end of this. In terms of who they've lost so far, they brought in Cazette. I'll start on that side. They brought in Tolisso, both free transfers. Tolisso, a central midfielder from Bayern, who didn't play a lot, but seemed to be really talented. If you're in that club, I feel like it's in your DNA. It looks like Jason Denayer has moved on, which is a little bit disappointing, but happens is he's definitely not young, but seems like he should land somewhere. In terms of others, I mean, Kadewere is still there. That looks like they brought in Tete from Ukrainian side, Shakhtar Donetsk, which is important. Want to see if Roman Favre is still there, who was a big mid-season signing and seemed to be really good for them. Still always going to have a ton of talent, ton of ability to attack. They brought in Kone as well from Troyes, which is a good signing, I think. Defense is going to be an issue for them. They need to fix. Peter Bosch somehow stayed there. I don't know how he kept that job, but he did. So good for him. Yeah, Jason and I are only 27, so I'm pretty surprised that he's without club at the moment. But there's probably something that's going to happen with that, or maybe they re-sign and bring him back. He wasn't playing great for him, but defense has never been a strength of Lyon. Moving to Monaco, who spent a ton of money on a Champions League playoff team 2 seasons, or excuse me, before last season, that ended up getting bounced out by Shakhtar Donetsk. So much that happens since now that team is probably playing nowhere in Ukraine because of the war there now. Really disappointing. But Philippe Clement is still there. He had taken over halfway through the season from Niko Kovac, who moved back to the Bundesliga, but was ultimately sacked way back when, I think, because he didn't get along with management. But bringing in Minamino from Liverpool, I'm not sure what he's going to bring, but Brielle Mbolo coming over from Borussia Mönchengladbach, I had not seen as a big move. He's a big, fast player, and that's going to be important to them up front, especially as their attackers were aging and really not that big. Losing Tchouameni to Real Madrid was disappointing, but that $88 million matters, and they're probably going to throw that everywhere. Losing Sidibe was disappointing, I'm sure. But other than that, losing Lecomte on loan to Espanyol makes sense, I think, because he wasn't really playing. It was, I think, had been, sent to Athletic. Where was it? To Atletico Madrid, I believe. But anyway, brought in Myron Boadu, who we'll see what happens for him in his second season. Also expect Mbolo to take a little time to get involved, but he's big, he's strong. He'll probably take a bunch of fouls, but I look forward to that. Willem Gobel's coming in from Nantes. It's a pretty big signing. I mean, Monaco are there to spend money. I mean, rich place for sure, but never really expected them to go after it at this level, especially after seeing what happened in the last season with the playoffs and what that took out of them. But they're prepared to do that again after conceding a late goal to Lens in the last game of the season. Awesome match day that was, match day 38 in France. But ultimately a team where it looks like Alexandre Nubel is still around, so that's important. Still on loan, I guess, for the 2-year loan. And then Mayeki behind him is pretty young, but young team, a lot of talent. They spent a lot of money. I tend to think that they won't be as good, and but they did go on quite a run to finish in the Champions League position at the end of last season. And last but not least, PSG, who won the league by a million miles last year, brought in Galtier, who is like the guy that conquered them essentially. So many clean sheets for Christophe Galtier when PSG were scoring 4 or 5 against all the other teams, it seemed. Bringing in Vitinha matters. Nuno Mendes, also really talented. But they lost Di Maria. He's getting older on a free transfer to Juve. Ariola got signed finally and will stay in West Ham, at West Ham. They loaned Dagba to Strasbourg. Simons is gone to PSV on a free transfer. That's a bit surprising. But PSG are going to be so deep, so strong. They'll score a ton of goals and probably will run away with the league, as disappointing as it was. And I don't really know how different it was a couple of seasons ago and why Lille were much better. But something happened. Click form last year. It wasn't as dominant 2 seasons ago, clearly, because they didn't win the league. But last year was over from the beginning, it felt like. But when I look at the team, Callum Wendo coming in, or coming back from Lens, I guess, was a big deal. He was really good for them, and I like to see what he turns into. Sarabia coming back from Sporting Lisboa. Also, I mean, they have so much talent, so much ability. Don't expect them to have much trouble really with anything. But we'll see what happens and see if they kind of name their, I guess, motivation was a big problem for them. They scored 1 million goals, 2 goal, 2.25, 2.5 goal favorites, pretty monstrous all the time. But they did a fairly good job of covering those numbers. And I'm going to try my best to stay a little bit further away from the hot fire that is PSG, because they beat me up fairly well last season. Now, as we transition to some betting stuff, and now that I've gone through each of the teams, I mean, PSG at 1 to 10 or 1 to 9, excuse me, to win league minus 900, pretty big number. Seeing Lyon, Marseille, Monaco all at 16 to 1. I think based on transfer values or squad values, Monaco sits second there. That's probably reasonable. And then the next tier, Rennes, Nice at 50 to 1. Big numbers right there for sure. I don't know, of all those, I think I would say that Monaco probably has the second best chance to win the league, but there's a big difference between those two squads. And unfortunately, you got to deal with Monaco having the Champions League qualifying, which is going to be a big problem for them. Lionel Messi is the odds-on favorite for most assists, which I guess isn't surprised because Mbappe is going to score more goals. But it's a little bit surprising seeing a non-PSG player at 12 to 1, Lovro Mayer. I believe he is from Rennes. I probably should check that just to make sure. Yes, he is from Rennes, and they're going to score a ton of goals. Borjo also on that list. So those are important things. Paqueta coming in, but I'll leave that behind now. Odds to win the league without PSG. Lyon is favored actually at plus 150, Marseille plus 175, Monaco 2-1. I mean, Monaco had to go through that incredible run to qualify for Champions League, winning, I think, 10 straight matches towards the end of the last season. Great for me as I had a future of them finishing the Champions League place. So thank you. Merci, Monaco. But I'm not sure that I want to get involved with that because that was a big problem for them last season. And I would expect the same type of troubles this year, even though they have just as deep of a squad, it seems. So they did a lot of transfer market work for the season last year. 2-1 odds and having to fight Marseille, who I guess is playing in Champions League, but Lyon have nothing to worry about. And that's probably why this number is right there. Relegation, we have Ajaccio at minus 200, Lorient minus 160, Auxerre minus 120, and Clermont even money because there are going to be 4 teams relegated. So not surprised that even a 4th team would be even. I feel like Clermont with time in the league matters. Lorient, based on their squad value, transfer market certainly doesn't agree with them being a relegation side or second most likely. As you look further down, Troyes 120, Toulouse at 2-1. I just, Toulouse as 2-1 underdogs when 4 teams, I guess underdogs is relative. I mean, 2-1 as a future to be relegated when there's 4 teams going down. Yes, they did win Ligue 2 and we're in the playoff, the promotion playoff the year before that. Both good signs, but that's a little bit longer of odds than I was expecting for them. Angers at 3-1, Reims at 3-1 is insane. I wish I could bet the other way, but I don't think that'll ever be offered. Brest at 3-1 is, I think, a lot more in danger than Reims would be. Montpellier 7-1. I guess now we can look for a long shot relegation candidate because I'm not sure. I mean, Saint-Etienne were not good, and I think there were a lot of problems in Bordeaux that people thought that might be happening. But Mets were probably expected, but there's good chances based on the financial situation of these French clubs that one of these big names could go down. I don't think based on how Strasbourg played last season, nor anyone above them is really at risk. So it's probably, Nantes, they had a good year and had a lot of confidence, probably will coming into this year as Coupe de France champions. Maybe they don't handle the European berth well. So that's maybe one to potentially look at 10-1. But Montpellier 7-1 as a long shot might be one I'd look at just based on how poor they were at the end of the second half of the season last year. And that seems to happen where it carries over quite a bit, despite the season kind of restarting and refreshing and everyone hitting the sunbeds for the summer. Top 3 finish, Lyon minus 110, Marseille plus 100, Monaco plus 125. This is one I played last year. Nothing for PSG because that's expected for them to win by leaps and bounds. I'm interested in Rennes at 2-1. We'll see what their European commitments look like. Nice at plus 350. I feel less confident about because losing Gaultier is going to be a big deal. Lille selling everybody at 550. Lens at 6-1 is interesting. I want to see their European commitments because I believe they're in the Conference League. Strasbourg at 7-1 looks pretty good and then drops off big time for top 3 finish. So I'm not really expecting like Nantes at 40-1. That seems unlikely. So probably want to shoot at Strasbourg or lower, so 7-1 or better. There's a lot of teams that are going to be fighting all over for it. And as you saw last year with all the drama, it came down to the last day. For top 5 finish, Lyon, Marseille, Monaco, all minus 300. Even money on Rennes at just even, as well as Nice. Lille at 225, Lens at plus 400, Strasbourg plus 550, Nantes 7-1. I think there's some value on Rennes there. I think they scored so many goals. If they can keep their players, that's a big question though, because in January they might be selling some guys, even if they don't sell them this summer. That's probably a place I would want to look, and we'll end up seeing what happens there. Top goal scorer Kylian Mbappe minus 200. That should probably win, assuming he stays healthy and doesn't leave for Real Madrid, but even might do enough. And I guess that's probably unlikely. But in terms of others, Wissam Ben Yedder had a great year last year. We'll see how the new players added to his team, like Embolo, kind of comes in because he'd want to play probably under Embolo and use Embolo's speed. But yeah, this is probably a trophy that will settle and finish in the PSG camp. I think that does it. Almost 40 minutes on Ligue 1. Thanks everyone for tuning in. You can follow me on Twitter, @thereal_G Warner. Thanks for watching, whether you're on StreamYard and Spotify, listening on YouTube or on Apple Podcasts. Please leave a review, 5 stars if you could, if you liked what I did. If you throw any questions there, I'll happily answer them either the next time I look at it or when we do a podcast as we get close to the league. I think I might do a futures one towards the end, but stay tuned for La Liga as well. Thanks for joining, and we'll see you all soon.